In a quiet August night of 2001, a Swissair cargo flight touched down at Johannesburg International Airport. Among the containers unloaded that night, one was different, plain, metallic, and unremarkable at first glance. But inside, it held a fortune, $6.5 million in cash. Guard Force International, one of the most trusted security firms, was assigned to ensure its safe transfer. Everything was going according to plan, until disaster struck. In a matter of moments, the unthinkable happened. The treasure was stolen. $6.5 million in cash, gone. This was no ordinary heist. But the real shock was yet to come, because a few weeks later, a second heist would strike. One so bold, so breathtaking, it would become one of the biggest in South Africa's history. This is the story of not one, but two major cargo heists that shook South Africa to its core. Johannesburg International Airport, now known as OR Tambo International Airport, is more than just an airport. It has always been the heartbeat of South Africa's connection to the world. Located in Gauteng, the country's economic powerhouse, it stood as Africa's busiest air transit hub. Even back in the 90s, millions of passengers passed through its gates annually, and its substantial cargo facilities handled a significant portion of South Africa's air freight. It was a place where planes constantly touched down and took off, where goods and people flowed in and out, keeping the nascent post-apartheid nation linked to global markets. But it wasn't just about passengers. This airport was a lifeline for trade. With a considerable cargo capacity, it was where South African industries met the world. From precious metals and high-end electronics to fresh produce and pharmaceuticals, almost anything of value passed through these terminals. At the airport, high fences stood tall, dotted with security cameras that swept every angle. Guards in crisp uniforms patrolled the grounds, giving an impression of absolute security. To anyone watching, it seemed like a fortress, one where valuable cargo was stored, moved, and protected under constant watch. But in 2001, this sense of security was shattered. The illusion of safety would be exposed as just that, an illusion. Because beneath the surface of this bustling, well-guarded complex lurked cracks that a group of bold and ruthless criminals would soon exploit. What was supposed to be the safest place for high-value cargo would become the scene of not one, but two of the most brazen heists in South African history. The first of these robberies happened late August night in 2001. That night, a particular consignment arrived, one that carries a weight far beyond its physical bulk. It's a sealed container, unassuming in its gray metal shell, but inside it holds a fortune. $6.5 million in cold, hard cash. A mix of US dollars and Portuguese escudos, destined for a regional bank. The Swissair flight, which had carried this treasure across continents, had landed hours ago. Now, the valuable container had been carefully offloaded from the belly of the plane and placed onto a specialized transport vehicle. This vehicle, an armored truck operated by Guard Force International, a reputable security company, was meant to carry the high-value cargo the short, secure distance from the aircraft to a protected vault within the airport grounds. It was a routine, albeit high-stakes operation that had been rehearsed and executed countless times. The security protocols were believed to be ironclad. Outside, the vehicle, reinforced and seemingly impenetrable, began its slow, deliberate journey. Inside the vehicle, highly trained security guards, and alert, focused intensely on their charge. They were professionals, veterans of countless transfers, accustomed to the pressure that came with guarding such immense wealth. The route was predetermined, the timing precise. Every turn, every corner, every shadow was supposed to be predictable, controlled. But predictability was a luxury they wouldn't have tonight. Suddenly, out of the shadows, chaos struck. Dark, fast-moving vehicles appeared without warning. They swerved with brutal precision, boxing in the armored truck, forcing it to a sudden, violent halt. The unexpected maneuver sent a jolt through the guards inside, their hearts pounding in their chests. Before they could even fully process what was happening, doors of the attacking vehicles flew open. Men, many of them wearing balaclavas or dark scarves to hide their faces, poured out. They moved with a chilling efficiency, a practiced ruthlessness that spoke not of desperation, but of careful planning. Their gleamed menacingly under the faint airport lights, and automatic rifles pointed directly at the security guards. There was no time for heroics, no chance for a coordinated defense. The sheer number of attackers, their overwhelming firepower, and the element of surprise were too great. Shouts barked in the night air, urgent and threatening. The guards, outmatched and staring down the barrels of powerful were forced to comply. Resistance would have been suicidal. Their priority in that moment shifted from protecting the cargo to preserving their own lives. They were ordered out of the armored vehicle, hands raised, their taken from them with cold efficiency. Their training might have prepared them for many scenarios, but this level of brazen, calculated attack on airport grounds, under the very nose of supposedly tight security, was something else entirely. The shock and disbelief were palpable, even amidst the terror. The robbers then turned their attention to the real prize, the container holding the $6.5 million. They knew exactly which vehicle to target, exactly where the most valuable item was located. This wasn't a random smash and grab, it was a surgical strike. Using their own tools, or perhaps even forcing the subdued guards to assist, they swiftly gained access to the high-value container. The ease with which they managed this was disturbing, suggesting an intimate knowledge of the security company's procedures and the truck's vulnerabilities. Within minutes, the container was transferred from the guard force vehicle to one of the robbers' own trucks. The process was astonishingly quick. They worked silently, swiftly, as if performing a well-rehearsed dance of crime. With the loot secured, they vanished into the night, leaving behind a scene of stunned guards and an empty armored vehicle. The aftermath was immediate chaos. Sirens soon wailed across the airport as the alarm was finally raised. Police cars swarmed the area. Investigators, forensic teams, and high-ranking security officials descended upon the scene. The questions began almost immediately, sharp and insistent. How could this have happened? Who knew about this shipment? Who could have possibly coordinated such a precise and daring robbery in what was supposed to be a highly secure zone? The answer began to emerge far faster than anyone might have expected, and it was deeply unsettling. Within days, the first arrests were made, and they weren't the hardened, notorious criminals from outside gangs that many might have initially imagined. Instead, the suspects rounded up were people intimately familiar with the airport's inner workings, individuals who possessed the keys to its supposed security. 6 members of security companies employed at Johannesburg International Airport were taken into custody. These weren't just low-level guards. Some held positions of trust and responsibility. The revelation shook the entire airport community. It instantly changed the narrative from a simple robbery to something far more sinister, an inside job. This meant that the very people entrusted with protecting the airport's most valuable assets, the individuals who passed through security checks every day and had access to restricted areas, were allegedly the ones who facilitated the crime. They knew the schedules, the routes, the cargo manifests, and the security weak points. They were the eyes and ears of the operation, turning their knowledge against the system they were paid to uphold. This was more than a security breach. It was a betrayal of trust, and it exposed a deep, dangerous vulnerability within the airport's own workforce. A place where security was supposed to be ironclad had been torn open from the inside. The incident served as a stark, undeniable warning, a warning that, tragically, would soon prove to be unheeded. The aftermath of the Swissair heist left a deep scar on Johannesburg International Airport. In the days that followed, the airport's security headquarters became a hive of frantic activity. Meetings stretched late into the night. Voices grew louder, and the pressure to find answers was unbearable. Every procedure was questioned, every protocol scrutinized, all in a desperate attempt to uncover how $6.5 million had vanished without a trace. Security measures were discussed, some hastily put in place. More patrols appeared, surveillance cameras were supposedly monitored with greater attention, and the screening of airport personnel became more stringent, at least on paper. Official statements were issued, stern and confident, promising that such a breach would never happen again. The public was assured that Johannesburg International was now a fortress, and international airlines were told that their cargo was safer than ever. However, the airport's leadership was too focused on reacting to what had already happened instead of preparing for what could come next. The rush to patch up the exposed flaws gave the appearance of action, but it wasn't always clear if it was the right action. Familiar routines had a way of dulling urgency, and as days turned into weeks, some within the airport began to settle back into their old ways. Beyond the airport's fences, the world moved on. News of the Swissair heist faded from the headlines, replaced by other global stories. Planes continued to take off and land, cargo flowed in and out, and millions of dollars worth of goods traveled through the same channels that had been exploited. Life returned to a fragile, uneasy normal. But this calm was an illusion, a brief pause before something far worse. And just before the end of the year, that false sense of security would be shattered with a violence no one expected. It's December the 27th, 2001. The day dawned bright and clear, a typical late December summer's day in Johannesburg. The airport was bustling with holiday travelers and the usual pre-year-end flurry of cargo operations. It was just another seemingly ordinary Thursday, barely 4 days after Christmas. For most, the focus was on family, festivities, and the approaching new year. For a select few, however, this specific day, this specific flight, had been meticulously planned for months. The target was KLM Flight 591, arriving from Amsterdam. This wasn't just any cargo plane, it was a flying treasure chest. Inside its secure holds lay a consignment of unimaginable value, nearly $10 million, approximately 76 million rands at the time, a mix of crucial foreign currency destined for banks in Angola and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and a precious shipment of diamonds and high-value jewelry originating from Israel. This was wealth in its most concentrated form, raw purchasing power and dazzling luxury, all waiting to be transferred. The plane landed smoothly, on schedule. The air traffic controllers directed it to a designated cargo bay, a part of the airport often less crowded than the main passenger terminals, but still a heavily monitored, restricted area. Security protocols dictated that such a high-value consignment would be handled with the utmost care, under constant surveillance and with armed guards. As the plane came to a halt, the cargo doors opened, revealing the stacked containers within. Among them, clearly marked for high security handling, were the specific containers holding the foreign currency, diamonds, and jewelry. This was the moment the plan, hatched in the shadows, began to unfold. 3 airport security guards, employees of the very system designed to protect these goods, were dispatched to oversee the offloading. They were equipped with an armored vehicle, a robust, purpose-built truck designed to transport valuable cargo from the aircraft to the secure airport vault. This was their routine, their job. They began the process, their movements seemingly normal, methodical. Then, a small, almost imperceptible action occurred. One of the guards, supposedly focused on the task at hand, subtly reached for his cell phone in an area where communication protocols were strict, where every movement was meant to be observed. This single action was a silent signal, a chilling betrayal. Barely a minute later, the quiet of the airport tarmac was broken. Several plain, dark cars and vans sped onto the area where planes park. This was a big security problem because these were not the usual airport vehicles, and they should not have been there. But they drove onto the tarmac very easily and went straight towards the KLM airplane and the armored truck. The armed men who spilled out of these vehicles moved with breathtaking speed and precision. They were heavily armed, their faces obscured by balaclavas, their movements coordinated, almost choreographed. They didn't hesitate, didn't falter. They immediately converged on the 3 airport security guards, overwhelming them with a display of superior firepower and brutal efficiency. The guards were held up, their weapons quickly disarmed, their bodies forced to the ground. The scene was one of shock and disbelief for any distant observer. A robbery in broad daylight on the sacred ground of an international airport tarmac. It was an act of breathtaking audacity. But what happened next truly defied belief, pushing the boundaries of what was conceivable for an inside job. Eyewitness accounts, later corroborated by chilling video footage obtained during the investigation, painted a picture that was both absurd and terrifying. The robbers, rather than struggling with the heavy containers themselves or bringing their own specialized equipment, began to order the subdued airport security guards to help them offload the stolen goods. The port security officials moved the heavy containers of foreign currency. They handled the precious boxes of diamonds and jewelry, not into their own armored vehicle, but into the robbers' waiting vans. The sheer volume of the loot meant it wasn't a quick grab. This was a sustained operation, lasting several minutes, unfolding under the open sky of one of Africa's busiest airports. Yet, remarkably, no immediate effective intervention occurred. The robbers worked with an almost leisurely confidence, as if they knew they had ample time, as if they were certain no alarm would be raised prematurely. This scary composure only deepened the suspicion of extensive inside knowledge and coordination. Once the entire consignment was transferred, the robbers simply re-entered their vehicles. No frantic getaway, no desperate dash. They drove away from the aircraft, calmly exiting the restricted airside area with the same astonishing ease with which they had entered. They disappeared into the labyrinthine roads surrounding the airport, leaving behind the empty KLM cargo hold, the disarmed and traumatized guards, and an unfolding nightmare for airport authorities. The initial shock of the robbery quickly gave way to outrage and a furious demand for answers. How, just months after the Swissair heist, could an even more brazen and costly robbery occur? This wasn't just a lapse. It was a systemic failure of monumental proportions. The public, the airlines, and indeed the South African government demanded accountability. An emergency meeting was convened just 6 days after the heist, bringing together high-ranking officials from the airport's company South Africa, ACSA, police, and security agencies. The minutes from this meeting, later made public, painted a damning picture of the catastrophic security failures that led directly to the KLM heist. These weren't minor oversights. They were fundamental breaches of established security protocols. The investigative teams, a combination of the South African Police Service, SAPS, specialized Hawks units, and airport security intelligence faced a monumental task. They weren't just looking for physical evidence, they were trying to untangle a complex web of human relationships, corrupted trust, and systemic failures. Every airport employee became a potential suspect, and every security camera footage was a crucial piece of the puzzle. The sheer volume of data, the thousands of potential leads, were overwhelming. One of the most critical pieces of evidence was the detailed video footage from the tarmac during the KLM heist. It was chilling to watch. The ease with which the robbers operated, the inexplicable cooperation of the guards, the calm departure, it all painted a picture of a well-oiled machine, not a desperate, spur-of-the-moment attack. The cell phone call made by one of the guards just before the robbers arrived became a central focus. Who was he calling? What instructions were given or received? This was a direct link to the inside, a whisper of betrayal captured on tape. Every security log was scrutinized. Every vehicle permit issued that day was checked. Every employee's background, previous disciplinary actions, and known associates were put under the magnifying glass. Police began connecting the dots between the Swissair and KLM heists. Further investigations revealed disturbing breaches in protocol. A security guard at an airside entrance had allowed unauthorized vehicles into restricted areas by swiping his own permit card, bypassing standard checks. Moreover, the driver of the vehicle used in the robbery possessed a security permit that had been reported missing 2 years prior, yet it had not been deactivated. These lapses pointed to systemic failures within the airport security framework. The pressure mounted not just on the police, but on the airport's company South Africa, ACSA, itself. Their reputation was in tatters. International airlines, already operating on tight margins and high security demands, began to express serious concerns. Some even threatened to pull out of Johannesburg, fearing for the safety of their high-value cargo and, by extension, their profits. This wasn't just a loss of money. It was a blow to South Africa's image as a reliable trading partner. The primary victim, the Israeli firm that owned the vast consignment of foreign currency, diamonds, and jewelry, was swift to act. They had entrusted their valuable assets to a global carrier, KLM, expecting the highest levels of security during transit. When those assets disappeared, they held the KLM directly responsible. A massive lawsuit was filed, demanding $9.5 million in compensation from the Dutch airline. This wasn't just about reclaiming money. It was about setting a precedent, ensuring that carriers understood their responsibility for the goods they transported. KLM, caught between a rock and a hard place, found itself in an unenviable position. They were the direct carrier, but the robbery had occurred on the airport ground, in a facility managed by ACSA. They argued that while they were responsible for the cargo on their aircraft, the moment it was offloaded onto the tarmac for transfer to the airport's secure vault, the primary responsibility for its safety shifted to the airport authority. Thus, in a logical and expected move, KLM immediately initiated its own legal action. They sued the airport's company, South Africa, ACSA, for indemnification. KLM's lawyers argued that ACSA had a fundamental duty to provide a safe and secure environment for all operations within its perimeter, particularly for high-value cargo. They contended that ACSA's demonstrable security lapses, the unpermitted vehicles, the unchecked individuals, the lack of police escort, the compromised employees, were direct causes of the robbery. KLM was essentially saying, "We fulfilled our duty in the air, you failed in yours on the ground." These legal battles were complex, drawn-out affairs spanning years. Years passed, but the shadows of the Swissair and KLM heists continued to loom large over Johannesburg International Airport. While some arrests were made and some individuals faced charges, the full scope of the criminal networks and the complete recovery of the stolen millions remained elusive. The feeling persisted that the masterminds, those truly orchestrating the inside operations, might never be fully brought to justice. The incidents forced a painful, overdue reckoning with airport security in South Africa. The spotlight intensified on the pervasive issue of insider threats. It was no longer a theoretical risk. It was a chilling reality that employees entrusted with access and information could be corrupted or coerced into aiding criminal enterprises. This revelation fundamentally changed how airport security was viewed and managed. After the cargo heists, the Airports Company South Africa, or ACSA, had to make big changes to its security. They started doing much deeper background checks on everyone who worked at the airport, especially those who could get into restricted areas or see sensitive information. This meant checking criminal records more carefully, looking into people's lifestyles, and keeping an eye on them over time. For example, someone who was out on bail for robbing someone with a weapon would no longer be able to just walk into secure areas. Access to the airport also became much tighter. The physical security got a major upgrade with new systems that use things like fingerprints or eye scans to get in. They also made stricter rules for vehicle permits and put up more barriers to make it harder to get around. The days when just any car could drive onto the tarmac were supposed to be over for good. They also put in more advanced video camera systems and had teams watching the live feeds more closely. The idea was that having more cameras and people paying attention would not only stop criminals, but also let them step in right away if something did happen. The rules for handling valuable cargo were completely changed. Now, police escorts were required, and everyone involved, from the airlines to the security companies to the airport staff, had to communicate and work together much better. Maybe the most important change was trying to create a stronger feeling of security among all the airport workers. This meant giving them regular training, making it clear how to report anything suspicious, and getting everyone to feel like they had a part to play in keeping the airport safe. Even with all of these changes, the heists had a lasting effect. People's trust in the airport was shaken. For South Africa, which saw the Johannesburg International Airport as a sign of its growing economy in connection to the rest of the world, these crimes were really embarrassing. They showed that there were serious weaknesses. The airport, which used to be something to be proud of, was now also remembered for these bold acts of betrayal. The KLM heist, in particular, showed how a major international airport could be broken into by its own people because of a series of big mistakes in security. It made it clear that security is only as good as its weakest point, and that when people you trust turn against you, it can lead to huge losses. Today, the airport, now known as OR Tambo International Airport, is still a very important transportation hub. Its security is much better, and the rules are tougher. But the events of 2001 still leave a mark. The Swissair and KLM cargo heists are a stark reminder of how clever criminals can be, how valuable insider information is, and how important it is to constantly fight to protect global trade from those who want to steal from it. They remind us that even in places that seem the most secure, you always have to be on guard.